I have to record it.
Good, here we go.
Editing all.
Got the notice of that.
Welcome, welcome, everybody. We are still admitting a few people that are joining us. We've got a pretty big group here today. But we have a fantastic program for you in store, and I'm excited. I'm excited for this information because it's so timely. Gosh. So we have such a large group today that I have to just say we are happy that you are joining us today. We are aware that there are many of you that are not members, and so I just have to say, you know, if you are looking for more fantastic information like we are presenting here today, you might want to consider becoming a member because we have some fantastic programs in store. We've got another one happening late next week, and are really working very hard to bring to the group and to all of our members timely, relevant programming. So I just have to have my little appeal here right at the beginning. But got a couple of stragglers, but I want to get started as soon as possible because that will leave more room at the end for questions. Okay, so without further ado, I will toss it over to our illustrious board president, Libby Catalinich, please.
Thank you, Phyllis, and thank you to the programs group that have been just knocking it out of the park with great content for our community. So thank you. I want to introduce our two speakers today. We have Julie McCracken, who is the Vice President of Padilla, and she's the Vice President of their Corporate Advisory Group. She leads the firm's social impact area of expertise. She works with national clients to design and execute strategic communication initiatives to articulate commitments, goals, and progress, educate and engage stakeholders, and ultimately drive meaningful change in the areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, corporate responsibility, community engagement, and environmental sustainability. In her more than 2 decades with Padilla, her work has garnered the agency numerous national and local awards. And then also joining us today is Jeff Wilson, APR. He is the Vice President of Padilla. He has, although he would never show it to see him, more than 30 years of experience in communications. Jeff serves as the Vice President of Workplace Culture, DEI, and he's the Chief of Staff at their firm. It's a national public relations, marketing, digital branding firm with offices in Minneapolis, New York, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, DC, and Richmond, Virginia. In his role, Jeff serves as a member of the agency's senior leadership team, responsible for workplace culture programs, oversight of administrative functions across the agency, internal communications, and internal DEI initiatives. He also provides DEI strategic counsel to clients as part of the agency's social impact team. He served on the national board for PRSA. Thank you for your service, representing the Mid-Atlantic District from 2021 to 2022, which would probably have been a very eventful time. So thank you for your service. Thank you both for joining us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to our speakers.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Libby and Phyllis and Casey Crabtree, who served on the PRSA National Board with me, for first reaching out and asking if we would be interested in sharing our presentation. So we're very, very excited to be with you all today. We do have some slides that we will share with you, and we will also make them available to Phyllis afterward, and she can certainly share them with the entire group after the fact. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. We just mentioned a little bit about Padilla, but just to give a little bit more, as Libby mentioned, we're a full service PR marketing digital branded firm with offices from coast to coast. Our West Coast office is in San Francisco. We have about 240 employees. And when we talk about Padilla, we're really talking about 4 different agencies under the Padilla family of brands. There's Padilla, which is our flagship traditional agency. Julie and I both are a part of that organization. Shift is our firm, our division that focuses primarily on technology. Food Minds is our food science division. It's about 30 individuals, 21 of them are registered dietitians. So they really get into the nitty gritty about food policy and food science. And then Joe Smith is our branding firm. We are a part of Avenir Global, which is a global holding company of public relations and communications firms based out of Montreal, but there are offices all over Canada, the US, Europe, and even the Middle East. So that is a little bit about Padilla. This is the agenda that we're going to go through today. We'll talk a very little bit about the state of DEI in the communications industry in general. And then we'll talk about what Padilla as an organization has done to kind of address DEI for ourselves. And then we'll go more broadly to talk about social impact and what we're seeing, our perspective on that. We're going to also talk about some best practices when we talk about social impact in general. We have a client spotlight of a client that we've been working with for many years that Julie will talk about, Edward Jones. And then we'll end with some DEI specific tips and tools that we've used for some clients and for ourselves. And as Libby mentioned, we want to leave time for Q&A at the end. So with that, the state of the DEI communications in the communications industry. We all know, and it's been overstated so many times, that it's been a historic past 3 years. We have all been living in a pandemic within the pandemic. While COVID-19 was going on, there were calls for greater social justice all across our country and the world. The murder of George Floyd and other acts of violence against people of color really did become this boiling and tipping point. As we mentioned, our headquarters is actually in Minneapolis. The George Floyd murder happened about a mile or so away from our corporate headquarters. And even after that, we're continuing to see acts of violence against people of color continuing to occur. But that truly was kind of this tipping point. And because of that, organizations of all kinds and in all industries started making these public statements about wanting to do better as it related to DEI. There was a lot of call for transparency in of what people were doing, specifically in the advertising and public relations industry. A lot of the publications, trade publications, some of the organizations really did kind of shine a spotlight on our industry and really pointed out the need for greater diversity when it came to recruitment and retention. And it really was at all levels, not just entry-level positions. However, this year, as we start to see concerns about what's going on with the economy, we've seen where lots of organizations have started to cut back or even eliminate their newly established DEI departments and chief diversity and inclusion officers. Most notably, we've first started seeing this in the tech sector first, but other industries are starting to follow suit. So there've been things written about this in the general business publications and also in the trades. I know PR Week did a story last week where they talked about while corporations and some companies are cutting back in these areas, agencies still seem to kind of be pushing forward with DEI, their DEI offerings and the work that they're doing in that area. So with just to kind of level set when we talk about where are we as an industry, if we keep talking about movement and measurement and transparency, the latest information, some of the latest information from the US Census says that roughly 60% of our country is white, which means that about 40% are from ethnic and racial groups. And there's a breakdown there from about 19% for Latino and Hispanics, 13% African Americans. From there, conversely, when we look at our industry, and this is information from the US Department of Labor, and they have different classifications, but kind of the generic, when you look at people who are identified as public relations managers, you'll still see where about 20% of our industry people or BIPOC people are identified as part of a racial or ethnic group. So there's still some gap there between what our industry makeup is and what the population as a whole is. So with all the things that have been going on in the world and in our country, how did Padilla as an organization respond? So we, over the past 3 years, actually more than that, but after, again, the murder of George Floyd, we really in earnest stepped up the efforts that we wanted to do internally, not only for ourselves, but for our clients, and have been focusing on 4 primary areas of focus. Recruitment and retention being the first, agency training and content. And when we talk about content, we're talking about the content that we're creating for ourselves internally, and also how we show up in the community, how we show up on social media, and then client work. We'll talk about this a little later, some initiatives and programs that we've started to specifically help us with client work. Julie and I, again, Julie runs that section. So our social impact team as a part of our corporate group has been an offshoot over the past several years of some of that. And then community engagement as well. Again, in the company, in the communities where we live and work, how we show up as an organization. On our website, and again, we'll share this deck, there is a video case study of the work that we've done over the past couple of years that you can take a look at. But here's a snapshot of some of the progress that we have made as an organization over the past couple of years. Since 2020, we have increased the number of our BIPOC employees by 50+%. That sounds really great, but we also realized we went from just at 10% of our BIPOC employees to now when we last took our census, we were at about 16%. So again, we have made progress there. There's a lot more that we want to do. We've seen our BIPOC senior leadership, VPs and above, increase to 11%. We definitely have seen over the past couple of years where new employees that have come in, we're averaging about 20% BIPOC hires. Public relations, this next number is not terribly shocking, but 80% of our employees are women, with 65% of them being in the VP and above level. Something that wasn't originally a part of our program, but something that finance came and said, there are things that we can do better. So we started a supplier diversity program, and we've averaged about 25% of our suppliers being from diverse groups. And this is based on US and some state classifications. So it's not just what the government calls minority-owned businesses, but women-owned businesses, LGBTQ plus businesses, veterans-owned businesses. We have about 240 employees. 40 employees have been identified to be a part of our DEI initiatives as either part of our DEI council, which I lead, or champions and supporters. To help us with external client work, we developed this DEI collective, which I'll talk about in a little bit. One of the other things that Julie and I do, we run Padilla's corporate social responsibility program called Padilla Plugged In. And last year over the last 2 years, we've done about 600 hours of pro bono and in-kind sponsorship. A lot of it has been focused in DEI. And then we have a program that we're a part of called the Twin Cities PR BIPOC Career Explorer Program that is specifically for students of color to introduce them to the industry. To talk about that a little bit more, 6 agencies that have operations in the Twin Cities: Padilla, Carmichael, Lynch Relate, Exponent, Hotwire, Tunheim, and Weber Shandwick. The leaders of those agencies got together and said, what can we do that's more than just, offer an internship? The result of that was this Career Explorer program where BIPOC college students have been given a stipend, and it really does run as a calendar year program from September to April, where they are introduced to all aspects of agency life, in particular PR agency life, but sessions that the agencies have divided up and teach, talk about tech PR, healthcare PR, crisis PR, reputation management, lots of different areas. Originally, it was just going to be 3 universities in the Twin Cities area, but as word got out, other students from other areas have applied. So the first class, there were 9 different universities represented, including some HBCUs as far away as Florida. This year, there are 12 universities from across the country that have students participating, also including some HBCUs, Florida A&M, Howard University. So it's been a really great program. And the whole point of it is, again, to introduce college students to our industry, and then hopefully introduce them to our agency and use that as a pipeline for recruitment for us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Julie McCracken, to talk about social impact more broadly than just DEI.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And as Jeff mentioned, he focuses, well, he does do client work. He's focused really on Padilla's initiatives. And so I'm looking at this through the lens a little bit more of what we're seeing from the client point of view. So we've kind of combined both of our perspectives here to offer you a little bit of just insight as to what we're seeing. You know, one of the great things about being an agency like Padilla is that we get to work with a lot of different organizations, large and small, profit and not-for-profit. And so we, we have a glimpse into kind of a wide range of organizations. So Jeff, if you want to go to the next slide. So what are we seeing? I think the headline here and what we're seeing is that organizations, for organizations, this notion of like doing good and doing good because it feels good is no longer relevant and no longer good enough, right? So successful organizations are embracing more of this mentality of business for good is good for business. And this is being driven by a couple of factors. One is that more than ever before, stakeholders are expecting the organizations that they work for and do business with to take a stand, to speak up, and to really actually drive change, to work as change agents. We also are in a time where people have access to more information than ever before, and they expect more information than ever before, right? So we're seeing this real need for transparency among organizations. And as a part of that, a lot of the clients that we work with have started from a strategic standpoint, thinking about evolving from what was probably more of a traditional corporate responsibility kind of mindset or program to more of an ESG or an environmental social governance model or framework that holds them accountable to a little bit more transparency and a little more rigor in what they're reporting and what they're sharing with their stakeholders. Next slide. We talked about social impact, right? Jeff and I are part of the social impact group at Padilla. Why social impact? Why now? You know, why are we talking about this? And it really comes down to what we believe is timing. And our point of view on this is that social impact or real change happens or takes shape when two things collide or align, and those things are altruism and pragmatism. So we've got a couple of examples of what we mean by that on the slide. To give you a real life example of what we're talking about, I like to take the issue of clean water, right? So I don't think anybody on this Zoom call would argue that we don't want or need clean water for us, for our children, for our grandchildren, right? It's that's kind of a no-brainer. But if you put yourself in the shoes of an organization like, you know, a global consumer products company, think about a P&G that makes things like detergent and toothpaste, right? For them, the issue of clean water becomes a business imperative because they can't make their products without clean water, and consumers can't use their products without clean water. So for them, moving the issue of access and availability of clean water resources becomes not just something that feels good and is right to do, but an absolutely critical to the success of their business. So that's kind of what we talk about when we think about these things meeting. And it's when those things align, when the stars align, right? There's a real need for it and it feels good, that these movements tend to take shape. Next slide. So what does this mean for us as communicators? There are three kind of key shifts that we're seeing. The first is this movement from message to meaning. And this gets at the notion that storytelling is important. We know that, right? That's what we all do. Storytelling will continue to be important. But now there's another piece to it, and that's the data piece. And so it's important to be able to demonstrate impact with real numbers. And so that gets at this message to meaning piece. The second trend is this notion of moving from silos to systems. These issues, these social impact issues, things like diversity, equity, and inclusion are huge issues. These are not issues that any one organization is going to be able to tackle with a committee, right, or a subgroup. These are issues that to truly move the needle, you have to embrace and embed them throughout your organization. And then lastly is this notion of cost savings to value creation. These things that we're talking about are not designed to save organizations money. These things are all about creating opportunity. So it's about operationalizing the organization's purpose to create growth and opportunity. And the first step in that is to make sure that purpose is clearly defined and articulated. Next slide. So why purpose, right? And the answer to that is simple. It's because purpose matters. We've got some stats and figures on this slide. You can probably find a million more that might vary a percentage or two, but the bottom line is that purpose-driven organizations have less turnover, they have more revenue, they have higher market share, they tend to have greater customer loyalty. Consumers are more likely to buy from and recommend companies that are purpose-driven and that have a strongly articulated purpose. And they're more forgiving of those organizations when crisis may occur or when there is a little bit of a dip in reputation. They're more likely to still continue to support them. Next slide. When we think about social impact, we think about it in four kind of buckets. So there's corporate responsibility, which would be, if you think about, the big picture, that would be your big umbrella, right? That's what you as an organization stand for and believe in and are trying to make a difference in. And consumers want to know that you stand for something, right? So that's big picture. But then if you drill down, that community engagement piece, which is what you're doing to make the communities where you do business, where your employees and customers or clients live and work, what you're doing there to make it better, because that's also still very important. And then the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece, what are you doing to build an inclusive organization and to be inclusive to not only your employees, but to those that you do business with? And then lastly, the environmental sustainability piece. And we think about that as, what are you doing to ensure that our natural resources from an environmental standpoint are either as good as you found them or better for the next generation? So what do you do with all of this, right? We're talking about purpose, which can seem big and lofty, and we wanted to make sure that we gave you some takeaways that you could apply within your own organizations. So Jeff, next slide. So on the slide here, you'll see 8 things that we have found that Jeff and I kind of preach to on a regular basis. First and foremost, make sure your corporate purpose and values are clearly defined, understood, and appreciated. This is not a one and done. You can't roll out a purpose statement and move on and expect that people are going to understand and embrace it. Purpose and values are things that really should become the backbone of your organization and the basis upon which all decisions are made to truly, truly have impact. Second, and this will be no surprise because this is relevant across communications, right? But understanding what's important to your stakeholders. And when we think about that through a social impact lens, it's what's important to your business and the sustainability of your business, and what's important to your stakeholders. And if you think about those two things in a Venn diagram of sorts, that overlapping center is really where the sweet spot is. Third is defining your focus and stating your goals. So this one really is about putting a stake in the ground, and this is hard. This can be really difficult for organizations because when you put that stake in the ground and when you publicly commit to something, you're held to it, right? And if you don't hit that mark, you're going to have to answer questions as to why. And that can be a really scary thing, particularly for senior leaders within organizations. But it's important, if you think back to consumers want to know what you stand for and what you're doing, you've got to be willing to put yourselves out there and to put that stake in the ground. And I think as part of this, also have to be willing to accept that this is about progress, not perfection. You're not going to hit every single one of those goals by the date you set, or, things are going to happen that are going to be setbacks. And so this is really about demonstrating how you are moving the needle forward and being open and honest when you haven't met those goals, which can be really difficult for organizations to do. Starting from the inside out is all about really, embracing your employees as ambassadors first, and also about making sure that you're walking the talk. The last thing that you want to go out there and do is talk about, all of these great initiatives when you don't have your own internal house in order. So that's really one of the most important steps. Articulating the why behind what you're doing. That's going to be important as far as getting people's buy-in. And so again, not all that different from other basics of communications, right? But really important here to articulate why we're doing what we're doing and the role that we expect people to play or hope for people to play as an individual. Communicating progress openly and regularly. Again, this goes back to what I said a few minutes ago, right? Where it can be difficult for organizations to say they set a goal that they didn't reach, but that's that transparency piece. And so if you're going to put something out there, you've got to be willing to regularly report on your progress toward those goals. Number 7 is exploring partnerships with other like-minded organizations. As I said before, these are big, lofty things that we're thinking about, right? And there's strength in numbers. So it's important, when possible, to partner with others, strength in numbers, to drive progress. And then lastly, my favorite here, but be patient. This is a marathon, not a sprint. All of these things are things that take time to demonstrate progress, and it's a commitment. It's a commitment of time, it's a commitment of resources, it's a commitment of dollars and people when we talk about resources, because it takes people to make this happen.
And before moving on to the next one, I just want to say about partnerships. Sometimes that is where your associations and groups come in. Sometimes one organization may not be able to take on an entire issue, but your trade association or membership over association may be able to do that and give their strength in numbers.
Thanks, Jeff. So wanted to provide you a real life example of this, right? We talked a little bit about what Padilla does, but what does this look like for other organizations? And so the example that I'm going to share with you today is Edward Jones. I have a feeling this is probably a brand that most of you are familiar with. They have 52,000 associates across North America. There are more than 15,000 Edward Jones branch locations. So chances are you all drive by one or two of these probably on your regular route, because they are everywhere. But Edward Jones has been a client of ours for going on 4 years now. They are a fantastic organization who truly, I just can't speak to it enough, how they have embraced purpose and how purpose lives within their organization and how they really use that to guide everything that they do. So they celebrated their 100th anniversary this year, and while purpose has been at the heart of them for 100 years, while they have been doing all of these great things within their communities, they realized through some research that they may not have been telling the story of all that they were doing in a way that was going to contribute to their reputation, because citizenship is a major driver of corporate reputation, according to RepTrack. So Edward Jones came to us and said, we're doing all of these things. Can you help us share the story of what we're doing? So Jeff, if you want to go to the next slide. So 4 years ago, we issued our first Purpose, Inclusion, and Citizenship Report with Edward Jones. And you'll see the cover there on the slide is actually the report that was just released last week. So it's hot off the presses. But the report really tells the story of how they bring their purpose to life throughout the organization. So we report on year-end data. So this 2023 report reflects data from 2022. In 5 key areas of the firm. So we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, corporate responsibility, community, philanthropy, and their Edward Jones Foundation. And the report is organized according to their 3 purpose impact areas, which are lasting financial strength, promoting healthier futures, and advancing inclusive growth. And so those are kind of the 3 pillars that they've chosen to focus all of their activities around. And the report really, like I said, tells the story of how they put their purpose into action using a storytelling approach combined with those harder numbers, right? Where we can point to things that demonstrate where we're actually having an impact. And it's a great resource. We're going to share the website on the next slide, but if you think about those best practices and look at those best practices slide, I think this is a really good example of an organization who is taking those best practices to heart, right? So they have set some measurable goals. If you look, for example, particularly in the area of DEI, they have been very clear in diverse representation goals and where they are now and where they want to be at the end of 2025 when it comes to diverse representation among financial advisors and leaders within their home office. So they have set goals. They are each year reporting on progress and will continue to do that until they get to 2025. I'll be honest, they haven't made as much progress in some areas as they would like. And we had some difficult internal discussions about, do we share this? Should we share this? How do we approach this? And, came to the conclusion that yes, we need to share this, because back in 2020, when we set these goals, we made a commitment, and it's important to our stakeholders that we report on progress and where we are and what we're doing to achieve those goals. So that's just one example from within the report. I would encourage you, Jeff, if you want to go to the next slide. The website is there, and again, we'll share this deck with you all, but I would encourage you to go to the site and you can download the report and an executive summary. But again, I think you'll see a lot of examples of how those best practices are being brought to life. Also wanted to call out, though, that reports like this are kind of a dime a dozen. Everybody does them. Is the reality. So in order to generate attention and awareness among your stakeholders, it really boils down to what are you going to do with it? And Edward Jones made a commitment to share their story and to generate awareness for this, and they understood the importance of that. So there is a full integrated communications campaign that supports this report. So just last week, I mentioned this one out, we did an internal launch to associates with an announcement from Penny Pennington, who's their managing partner. Prior to that internal announcement, we had trained key leaders throughout the organization with message points and made sure that they were aware of the key pieces within the report that we really wanted to highlight. Following the internal launch, because we always want to share with our internal audiences first, we did an external launch on Tuesday with a news release. And this is also being supported with paid media, with social, with branch materials for the financial advisors and support team members to use. So really tried to make sure that we have, a heavy emphasis on this over the next 8 weeks, but that it's a sustained year-long campaign until the next report comes out in March of 2024. And there are videos on the site. There's a lot of great content that helps to bring to life the great stories and the brand, right? They're all about relationships, and we wanted that to come through so that while the numbers are important, we're still sharing it in a very human-centered way. So with that, we do have a couple of DEI specific tips and tools, again, to the point of wanting to give you all some actionable things that you could walk away with. So Jeff's going to talk through some of that with you.
Great, thanks, Julie. So one of the first things we did internally with Padilla that now we're doing externally for us is to develop a DEI writing guide. This was, I think we launched our first version of it in January 2021. We're actually on iteration number 2 because the language keeps changing and evolving. But we kept getting questions internally from our account teams and also some questions from clients about language. How do you say this? This is more than a glossary of terms for us. It really gives context to what's going on in the world, and it gives context to have conversations. For example, many people didn't know that Black Lives Matter. We have a whole section in there that talks about Black Lives Matter as 2 different things. One, Black Lives Matter is an organization, and it is an organization that predated the murder of George Floyd. It had been around, unfortunately, for another tragic death. But then there's the sentiment of Black Lives Matter or the hashtag Black Lives Matter. So just letting people know, if you're going to use that term, know what the term means, know the history and the origin of it. When we did round 1 of our writing guide, we introduced the term to some of our staffers of Latinx. And since then, and gave the origin and the history of where it came from, we got a lot of feedback from clients and internally that that is not a universally used term. It is being used a lot. I know we jumped on the bandwagon when it started being used, but there's some folks who still prefer to the term Hispanic, and there are some people who still preferred Latino and other things. So our next writing guide, we go into more details about that. We also talk about gender identity and those kinds of things, and explaining what it means. A lot of it too is we give this context of sometimes if you don't know, ask people, but we also talk about, and a lot of our healthcare clients have come to us asking questions about what do I use? Do I say underrepresented population, underserved populations? So we kind of go into that. A lot of these things, again, there is no one definitive answer to these things. And that's why I keep saying the language keeps changing. But this is a conversation starter, and we have lots of references in there to where we got these things from. To at least be knowledgeable when you give recommendations to your organization or to your clients if you're on the client side. Another thing that we had developed as part of our social impact team was the social impact scorecard. And it also is a tool. We actually, the first client we did it for was Mayo Clinic. But we have revamped it and used it for many clients. Lots of times your organizations get called to comment or respond or to have a point of view on lots of different topics. And a lot of organizations weren't sure if they should respond, if they shouldn't respond. And it's very different from what the business world was several years ago, where you now have your stakeholders, your customers, even activist boards of directors that ask and say, what is our point of view on this? So the scorecard is a tool with a battery of questions that ask you questions and help you decide if this issue makes sense. One, is this an issue that you're an authority on? Is this something that you have a point of view on and are contributing to the conversation? Is this an issue that is impacting your stakeholders? Does this impact your customers, your employees, the locations where you have operations? And sometimes that can be tricky because, for example, Mayo Clinic is an organization that is headquartered in Minnesota, but it also has operations in Arizona and Florida, where the climates can be very different. So you have to kind of take into consideration, again, where you live, work, and where you operate your business. Is this an issue where you have made progress? I think we talked earlier in the presentation about you can make all the statements in the world, but now consumers and stakeholders are smart. You can say all the things about how you support Pride. What have you done to show your support for the LGBTQ+ community? What have you done to support the BIPOC community? So people want proof points, not just grand statements or turning your website or your logo rainbow color for Pride or doing blackout for Juneteenth. What are you doing to actually advance the conversation? So the scorecard helps with that. And we actually even moved it from just a scorecard and have worked with some organizations where they've gotten all their key leaders around the table and have had these 2-3 day workshops where they hash all of these things out. And you want all of your people represented. You want the C-suite there. HR needs to be represented. If you have a chief diversity officer, they need to be at the table. If you have brick and mortar location, who is there representing your employees? Or if you're a manufacturer, who's representing those employees? You know, who is there if you have a large sales force out in the community, who's representing them? So getting all of these people together to have that conversation with them. And it's been some of the conversations, as Julie can tell you, have been uncomfortable, but always productive and rewarding for the organization. And then they can always lean back on that when they get called to, we need to do a statement about this, or we need to have a point of view. And part of it as well, we've had organizations, ourselves included, where we say, yes, this is an issue where we're going to do a statement, but just for our internal employees. This is something that's important to employees that we should to make a statement about. Yes, this is something that we have a strong POV about and have a perspective on. We will make a public statement about this. There's some issues where we say, you know, this is not something that is directly impacting our organization and we don't have anything to say. We may not respond to this particular situation. So again, this is one of the things that we have been using a lot and refer back to quite often. Again, here are just a sample of some of the questions that are in the scorecard. When sometimes understanding the motivations when people are calling you or asking you to act or take action or make a statement, you know, can your participation benefit the organization or benefit the issue? You know, again, as I mentioned, are your key stakeholders impacted? You know, so again, the scorecard is a guide. It is not fill in the blank. We got a score of 80, we should react, but it's used to help guide those conversations. And the last thing, and then we'll be able to open up the questions. One of the things that I always say, you know what you know, you don't know what you don't. So we, even though we're a communications firm and we've been growing our capabilities and social impact, we developed this DEI collective of 11 individuals, outside consultants that we've contracted with, that we call upon when we want advice or to, for example, we have some campaigns that we're working on right now that we've shared the creative with them, share the strategy with them to get their feedback. Are we being authentic? Are we being representative? Are we being unintentionally offensive in some way? And some of the individuals come from specific industries. About 40% of our revenue comes from food, beverage, and nutrition. So we made sure that we had representation from those areas as well. Again, we call on this group regularly. We just used them. I had a meeting with them on Friday about a tourism campaign that we're working on. But and again, it augments the expertise that we have internally, but it's nice to also have these outside objective opinions. And there've been a couple of times they're like, you all need to rethink that. That is a little bit off base. And then sometimes they're like, absolutely, you're right on the mark. This is good. And it also, I know sometimes for you, those of you on the corporate side or nonprofit, where you bring in the outside agency, you've been saying this internally, but sometimes the agency can say the exact same thing and it sounds so much better. Sometimes for us with our clients, we'll say, you know, this has been our recommendation. And we ran it through our DEI collective and they agreed with us. So it's been a good outside resource for us. We're in our 3rd year of contract with the individuals. And with that, I'm gonna stop sharing and open it up to questions.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. The DEI Collective sounds like a fantastic group for any of us to have. We do have some questions in the chat, but inquiring minds want to know, will we get copies of the scorecard and the writing guide? That seems to be a popular one.
Sure, we can definitely share a copy of the scorecard. We are in the throes of updating the writing guide. Now, I'm happy to share with you the one we created, but the one we're working on now is just so much more robust because the first iteration of it, because of what was going on in the world, we focused a lot on race and ethnicity. This next version, we spent a lot more time investing in gender, identity, and other issues as well. But yeah, happy to share.
Yes, thank you so much. Perhaps we can get the updated version up on our social channels or something later.
For sure.
Libby asked a great question. Libby, do you want to ask yourself or? Oh, you're on mute.
We were just laughing about this before
I know.
we started, so of course it would happen to me. I'm wondering if you've ever had the opportunity to collaborate with advocacy organizations and maybe broker deals, maybe that's too harsh of a way of saying it, but agreements between organizations, companies, and advocacy organizations who are looking for change or progress in one way or another. And do you find as an agency provider of counsel, is that an effective way to try to do that? Is that received well? Sorry, there are about 15 questions.
No. And yes to all of the above. Yes, we have worked with advocacy organization. It goes back to some of what Julia was talking about in the best practices of partnerships and how sometimes there's safety in numbers. In particular, our second largest practice area is healthcare. So lots of times we will work with advocacy organizations and our clients because sometimes that third party endorsement or that third party point of view is extremely valuable. And again, one of our clients we work with is a large nonprofit healthcare system, and we like to refer to them as a convener. So they have this mission, and one of their main objectives is or focus areas that we work with them on is health equity. Well, they can go it alone, but there's so many other people that are doing the exact same thing and working on the same thing and advocacy groups in those areas. So why not bring the best and brightest together and work collaboratively on the same thing instead of everyone doing their little bit, doing things more broadly. So yeah, we're a big fan of working with advocacy groups, working with them, supporting them, and then also just that collaborative nature that you talked about, Libby.
Thank you.
I think a lot of times too, our role in that space as an agency will become, a client will come to us and say, we're interested in this issue, or we want to get more involved in this issue. Can you help us kind of research and vet the appropriate organizations? And so I think it's helpful to have that third party objective view. A lot of times organizations will say, our CEO wants us to get involved in X. And then we look at issue X, and it doesn't make sense because it doesn't align with the business, or it's not going to be mutually beneficial for the organization and the advocacy organization. So, I think that third party objective feedback is really helpful.
Great. Next question is from Juliana. Sorry. It's from Susie Oval. She asks, is there any advice for internal like DEI campaigns when you have audiences who are in different phases of acceptance/change when it comes to accepting these DEI changes?
Great question. As Julia had mentioned, one of our saying, I know Julia, we both get tired of hearing ourselves say it, that this is a marathon and not a sprint. One of the first things that we did as an organization, because we had just individuals on different paths in their individual journeys. So one of the things that we did, we had conversations with people. We did a lot of listening sessions internally, particularly after George Floyd happened, but after other things happened and just in general, these listening and learning sessions to let people have conversations about what issues are important to them. If you start looking at doing employee resource groups or affinity groups. And we had found for ourselves, first thing I thought, I was like, well, of course we're going to do some affinity groups, starting with African Americans and Hispanic populations. And then as we started asking employees, we realized that some of our employees, there were other things that they were much more interested in. We had employees who were much more interested, particularly living in hybrid or when we were all in lockdown, about resources for parents or working moms. So we looked at other different groups. So a lot of it is having those conversations to understand where your employees are along the journey. Some will be further along than others. And some of those folks who have been kind of further along, those are the ones who raised their hands and we reached out to voluntarily to be a part of that 40 group that's a part of our DEI council internally. So again, we also started out with sharing a lot of information and resources on our intranet. Like we had lots of not only resources for employees related to diversity or equity or LGBTQ+, but things that they could take home to their kids, books, podcasts, webinars, even movies and television shows that they could watch, because that was a lot of what we found from some of our employees in the beginning, there was a sense of helplessness, like helplessness. I don't know where to start or who to turn to. So what can you do to kind of help? And again, for employees to hear from each other also was really helpful. So now we have quarterly DEI sessions with our employees that are open to everyone, where we I don't want to say a free for all, but it's a very loose agenda where people can bring up, topics and we discuss and talk about.
That's wonderful. This next question. So how do you measure your internal performance regarding retention? How do you expand your research to identify DEI candidates from non-traditional sources? And are there any successes or surprises that have yielded hireable candidates? From Judy Cushman.
That is an awesome question. You're absolutely right. The retention part was equally important as the recruitment part. I think we've all seen it and heard this. People can recruit and you can bring people in the door, but what are you doing to keep them and retain them, and also helping those individuals see themselves having a future with your organization? So one thing that as we're in like year 3 of doing this, we're establishing a mentor program where we're pairing employees with more senior leaders. It's going to rotate, so you don't have the same person all of the time. It's not in this deck, but we have a longer deck where we talk about the things we did. Of course, the Career Explorer program that I'd mentioned was one thing that we did. We're fortunate enough, Julie and I, we're on the East Coast. So we do a lot of recruitment at the historically Black colleges and universities. Here in Richmond, Virginia University is like 2 miles away from where our headquarters. There's Virginia State, there's Hampton University. Howard is in DC. We have an office in DC. So we kind of started there, but also in non-traditional places. We made sure that we had representation of members in associations, not only PRSA, and we're involved in the PR Council, I'm a part of their D&I community, but there is an Hispanic Public Relations Association. We have members who are in that organization and we place job listings there. There's a Black Public Relations Society. We make sure that we have members in that organization and we started placing ads there. But we also did start doing, looking at other non-traditional places. I'd mentioned, again, 40% of our work is in food, beverage, and nutrition. There's an organization that is called Diversified Dietetics. Their whole mission is to increase the number of people of color who are registered dietitians in that industry. I'd mentioned our Food Minds group. We have 30 employees in that group, 21 are registered dietitians. So we established a relationship with that organization as well. One of the probably most interesting ones that came about, and I don't know if I'd call this a best practice because it literally was catching like lightning in a bottle. We have a speaker series that we do every month that we call the Bubble Break, and we bring in creatives, we bring in academics, we bring in authors that talk about different topics, different things. Usually it's thematic. We're doing something for Women's History Month. Last year we brought in this author and journalist for Black History Month, but sometimes it's just a topic we want to hear more about. We brought in a couple of years ago this community activist, and he also clothing designer and also hip hop artist here in Richmond to be one of our Bubble Break speakers. We have our shared values, and he started his presentation off by taking our shared values and turning it into a spoken word piece, which it took me a minute or two. I was like, wait a minute, I know these words. We were so impressed with him. We kept a relationship. He's like, I really like what you all are doing. I think branding is something that I would be good at. So we offered him an externship to see if it was a right fit, if it was of value to him, if it was of value to us. Long story short, he's now one of our brand strategists as part of our Joe Smith group. So, so that is one of those, like I say, again, I would love to say, go out and find yourself an artist, and that will, but it just aligned perfectly for us. But I agree with you, you got to look in places that we have not looked before to find the talent. I refuse to accept what we've said for so long, that the talent is not out there. We can't find it. You may not be looking in the right places.
Exactly right. Last question from Julie Wright. She writes, I love the concept of going from message to meaning that Julie spoke to. Stories bring data to life. So are there any tips on how to tell DEI stories respectfully and authentically first person has pros and cons, what practices serve the subject of the story, but also meets the strategic goals.
Yeah, and I think you hit on it there with the authenticity piece, right? Because if you are trying too hard, it's not believable. And so one of the things that we have done with Edward Jones, and I keep using them as an example, but that's what have really been close to here recently. But we found diverse people throughout the organization who really became almost like spokespeople for us to tell the stories of how everything, how they were bringing the purpose to life and what they were doing from a community perspective. And so we, if you go to the website, you'll see one of the ways we communicated stories was through video. And so we did 3 stories they have an award called Spirit of Caring Award for associates who really bring the spirit of caring and the spirit of Edward Jones to life. And so we chose 3 of them and told their stories. And so they're within that collection of stories. There is a woman who would be probably a non-traditional, financial services person who kind of found her way into the organization and has advanced throughout the organization coming from a non-traditional background. There are, all sorts of stories that we've told, and we're telling the story of how purpose comes to life in their voice. And so I think we're kind of finding ambassadors to help tell the story. And I think the other piece is that the diversity is woven throughout everything that we're doing, right? We're not out there saying, look at our diversity message, because the organization is diverse in who they are and what they believe. And so we're really trying to share the story of their inclusive culture and their place of belonging. And it's who they are. So it comes through very authentically.
Okay. Such a great answer. Well, Jeff and Julie, I just have to thank you yet again for bringing this program to our members and guests. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I know they likely have. The chat has been a bit busy. There were lots of questions, so thank you so much.
My pleasure.
For everyone else, I'd like to remind you yet again, if you aren't a member, please become a member of the Puget Sound chapter. We have a ton of fun and our programs are great. We've got regional happy hours that are happening as well. And so we are working on some more in-person events and so for our members. So please, please, please become a member and join us. And I have to give a shout out for our next program, which is happening next Friday, March 31st. It's entitled Breaking Down the Branding Blueprint. We've got some great speakers for that program as well. So Libby, is there anything you want to say to our visitors here? No?
I just want to thank Jeff and Julie. I've gotten inspired by this. I'm in the midst of working on our DEI report, our annual report, and taking message to mission. I am very excited about that. And I love the idea of the outside panel of experts that you consult with and work with and collaborate with. What a great idea. What a valuable resource for your clients. So thank you for sharing all of your wisdom, your perspective, and your time with us. We really are very, very grateful for that. And for everyone else, thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful, sunny rest of your day, and wish you all the success in the world. Thank you. Take care.